The great mercy of separation. There are separations in life that do not feel like mercy at first glance. They come in the quiet of an evening, in the aching silence after a door closes for the last time, or in the stillness where a voice used to echo. At the moment it may feel like abandonment, loss, even divine absence. But what if it was precisely the opposite? What if the greatest act of mercy God performed on your behalf was removing you from someone who only wore the mask of affection, but secretly siphoned your soul? When God separates us from a narcissist, it is not always with thunder or fire. It is often with a whisper, a turning, a shift in the wind, and suddenly what you once thought was love stands exposed as manipulation. What you once called sacrifice is revealed to be control. The person who praised your light turns bitter when they can no longer dim it. It is in this divine distance, this sacred untethering, that the truth begins to rise. Not only the truth about who you are, but the truth about who they were all along, and perhaps even more unsettling, the truth about what they felt after God took you away. You see, there are things the narcissist will never say out loud, because to say them would be to confess that they were never in control, and worse, that they lost something heaven itself protected. Their greatest secret is not what they did to you. Their greatest secret is how your freedom undid them. Today, we will not peer into their minds out of curiosity, but for clarity. We will not examine their emotions to vindicate ourselves, but to better understand the holy ground upon which we now stand. Because when God removes you from a soul-devouring presence, it is not simply for escape, it is for revelation. It is so you might finally see the light from which you were being shielded, and so that they might feel the absence of the light they thought they owned. This, dear friend, is the beginning of the unveiling, and the truth, like grace, may wound before it heals. Let us begin. The rage behind the smile, how separation shattered their illusion. There is a kind of anger that does not scream, it simmers. It is not the fire that bursts, but the coal that burns silently under the surface. And nowhere is this fire more deeply kindled than in the heart of a narcissist who has lost access to what they once believed they possessed. When God separates you from someone who was never sent by Him, it is rarely with thunder. He does not always tear the veil with a crash of lightning. More often, He simply withdraws His light, and in that absence, the counterfeit begins to rot. What was once dressed in eloquence begins to smell of decay. What appeared as affection reveals itself as addiction to control. And the narcissist, whose world is built not on truth but on perception, is left trembling beneath the surface, though they wear a smile to hide it. The narcissist's attachment to you was never truly about love. Not the kind of love described in Corinthians that is patient and kind and not self-seeking. No, theirs was a false imitation, a mimicry of virtue. It was admiration for utility, affection for what they could extract. You were their source of emotional nourishment, the stage on which they performed their holiness. You were a mirror, not a companion, a reflection of the version of themselves they most wanted to believe was real. And so, when God intervened, when He drew a divine line of demarcation and said, "No more," the narcissist did not simply lose a relationship. They lost their illusion. They lost their grip on the performance. They lost the carefully woven fiction in which they were always the hero, and you, the ever-forgiving follower. And though they may never say it aloud, this loss incited within them a rage so primal, so suffocating, that it had to be buried beneath layers of composure just to function. You may have heard them say, "I'm fine, I've moved on." But don't be deceived by such lines. They are not confessions, but shields. Because to acknowledge the truth would mean to admit that your absence cost them something they did not expect, their reflection. You were not just a person in their life. You were the light by which they saw themselves as more noble than they were. Without you, they are left in darkness, not because you were their savior, but because they had used your light to avoid confronting their own shadows. C.S. Lewis once wrote that the devil is a liar, but not a creator. He can only distort, never build. In the same way, the narcissist builds nothing that lasts. Their identity is not constructed, it is copied, borrowed, stolen. When they smile after you leave, it is not the smile of peace, it is the smile of someone standing in ruins, unwilling to admit that the temple has fallen. And here's the spiritual truth they will never confess. Your departure was not simply an event, it was a verdict. When you left, it was not by your power, but by divine removal. God did not just take you out of their life. He brought judgment to the system they had built around your silence. To the narcissist, this is unbearable because it reminds them that they were never in control, that they never truly had you, that your love was not theirs to own, but a gift they were meant to steward. And when that gift was mistreated, God reclaimed it. Quietly, completely, irrevocably. That is why the rage is so deep, because in their pride they thought they were the center, and now they find themselves orbiting a wound they cannot name. A space where you once were filled now only with echoes of what they lost, but refused to grieve rightly. This rage is not seen on their face, it is etched in their decisions. It is not declared aloud, it is whispered in their bitterness, their accusations, their attempts to rewrite the narrative in which they are innocent and you are ungrateful. But behind all of it, behind the gossip, behind the cold smiles and the stony silence, lies one unspoken reality. They are angry with God, because God did what they could not stop. He removed you. He ended the show. He scattered the crowd. And worst of all, He gave you peace they can no longer disturb. So if you wonder whether they miss you, understand this. They do, but not in the way love remembers. They miss the control. They miss the reflection. They miss the lie. And in the quiet place of their soul, beneath the arrogance, beneath the indifference, they rage, not because they care, but because they lost the mirror that made them feel real. Let us now turn to the place where rage becomes emptiness, where the mask fades and the haunting begins. The haunting emptiness, why they feel abandoned by God. After the rage has quieted, after the storm of pride exhausts itself into silence, there remains a far more terrifying condition for the narcissist: emptiness. Not the kind of emptiness born from loss or grief. Those are sacred wounds that, when laid before God, can be healed. No, this emptiness is of a different nature. It is spiritual, it is cold, it is the hollow echo of a soul estranged from truth. And it is this very void that swallows the narcissist whole after God separates you from their reach. You see, when God removes someone from our lives, He doesn't merely alter our relationships, He changes the spiritual atmosphere. There are people who do not realize that the presence they enjoyed through you was not truly yours. It was His peace, His grace, His long-suffering patience flowing through your kindness. You were not the source, you were the vessel. You were not the light, you were the lamp that carried it. And now that you are gone, the lamp is removed. And so is the light. The narcissist may try to explain it away. They may fill their days with noise, with new faces, new attention, new illusions. But the soul knows. It remembers. It remembers the warmth that once lingered in your presence. It remembers the ease with which chaos was silenced when you spoke calmly. It remembers the strange, undeniable stillness that surrounded you, not born of self, but of the God who walked beside you. And now that stillness is gone, and the narcissist stands, alone, in the company of their own unrest. This is what makes the emptiness so haunting. It carries no visible scars, yet it devours from within. It is the quiet realization that their soul is not only without you, but without God. For they rejected not just your love, but the one who empowered you to love in the first place. To speak it plainly, they do not miss you as a person. They miss what your presence concealed, the spiritual poverty of their own existence. And so they begin to spiral, not with grief, but with displacement. They may claim to have moved on, they may even surround themselves with others, but no connection can replace the divine. No audience can imitate anointing, and no performance can replicate the still, small voice that left with you. C.S. Lewis once said, "God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from Himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing." The narcissist, though they may not speak it, is learning this truth the hard way. They have chased your light into the dark, only to find that it cannot be caught, because it was never yours to begin with. And so they blame, they distract, they retreat, but none of it fills the hole left by heaven's silence. And now, dear soul, I say this to you. Do not feel guilty for their emptiness. You are not the cause. You are simply the reminder, a mirror, once again, not of their glory, but of their absence, of what they could have honored, of what they could have chosen. And perhaps deep within they sense it, that this separation was not your doing, that it was divine, and that frightens them more than anything else. If you've ever wrestled with guilt or second-guessing, let this be your peace. You were not abandoned. You were protected. You were not the source. They were merely borrowing what they never honored. And when God separated you, He restored His light to where it belonged. Comment below if this resonates in your spirit. God didn't just rescue me, He reminded them who they were really rejecting. The secret envy, watching you heal without them. There is a strange paradox that unfolds when one escapes the grasp of a narcissist. You would think they would rejoice in your healing, as any who claim to have loved you ought to. You would expect at least a quiet respect for your strength, your restoration, your return to peace. But instead, what emerges is not respect, it is resentment. Not relief, but a gnawing envy, silent and bitter, cloaked beneath indifference. This is not because they truly desired your destruction. It is because your healing exposes a lie they had long believed, that you could not survive without them. To a narcissist, your strength apart from their presence is intolerable. Not because they wish you ill, but because your thriving contradicts their myth, the myth that they were your center, your savior, your sanctuary. When you begin to smile again, when your laughter returns with no trace of their name upon it, when your shoulders loosen from the weight you once carried in silence, something in them recoils. Because now they must confront the unthinkable. You are not broken. You never were. You were simply burdened by them. This revelation turns admiration to envy. Because in truth, the narcissist does not envy your joy as it stands now. They envy that it was always yours, and that they never managed to fully extinguish it. They begin to see that what they attempted to possess was not a reflection of them, but a reflection of grace. That your peace did not come from their approval, but from a source they never understood and could never control. Healing, to you, is a gift from God, but to them it is an indictment, because it proves that they were never the glue, never the foundation, never the center. It exposes their role not as your strength, but as your sorrow. And this is the crux of their suffering, not the loss of the relationship, but the loss of their story. The narrative in which they were needed, indispensable, superior, that tale has unraveled. And in its place is a truth too sharp to embrace, that you are whole, and they were never your healer. They may watch from afar, perhaps not openly, but through shadowed glimpses, digital footprints, whispered conversations, subtle inquiries masked as concern. They observe your joy not to celebrate it, but to measure what they failed to destroy. Their envy is not loud, it is dignified. It wears a suit and speaks with grace. But behind the civility lies a wounded ego, gasping under the weight of irrelevance. To be replaced is painful. To be forgotten is cruel. But to be proven unnecessary, that is unbearable. And so they sit, perhaps in boardrooms, perhaps in bedrooms, perhaps in pews, and quietly bleed the question they cannot voice aloud. What does it mean about me if they are thriving without me? C.S. Lewis once warned that pride is not simply the desire to be rich, clever, or beautiful, but the desire to be richer, cleverer, more beautiful than someone else. In the same way, the narcissist's grief is not that you have found light, it is that your light now exposes their darkness. In this sense, your healing becomes a mirror, but not the kind they once adored. This mirror shows not admiration but irrelevance, not desire but detachment, not weakness they can fix, but strength they can no longer diminish. And yet, in the quiet places of your soul, you must not be surprised by this envy, for it is the natural response of a counterfeit losing access to the original. It is the tremble of the thief as the gates close behind him. Let them envy, let them watch, let them wrestle with the ruins of their illusion. Because the truth is this: you did not leave as a victim. You walked away as someone reclaimed, and no amount of hidden envy can change the fact that your healing happened not in spite of them. The silent obsession, they still watch, but from the shadows. It is a curious phenomenon how those who claim to have discarded you with ease seem never able to look away. Their mouths say, "I've moved on," yet their eyes, though hidden, betray a different story, one of watching, of returning, of lingering on the edges of your life long after their chapter was supposed to close. This is the paradox of the narcissist. They do not love you, but they cannot forget you. They do not value your freedom, but they are fixated on your life once you gain it. And this fixation, this unspoken obsession, festers not in full view, but in secret, in shadows, in silence. Like a thief shut out of the house he once trespassed with ease, they now watch from the window, aching not for reunion, but for control once more. They may never speak your name again, or they might speak it too often, always as a footnote to their own narrative of innocence. But whether their lips are sealed or spilling half-truths, their attention betrays them. Because in every moment of stillness, in every scroll through a social feed, in every quiet observation of your progress, they are drawn back, not to who you are now, but to what they once claimed as theirs. You must understand, it is not you they seek. It is not even reconciliation. It is the feeling of ownership they once possessed, the ability to define how you saw yourself, the power to invade your joy with a single word or glance. But now that power is gone, and power once tasted is not easily forgotten. So they resort to haunting, not with presence, but with attention. They may never reach out directly, they rarely have to. Their silence becomes its own kind of statement. I am still watching. And they are watching how your laughter no longer trembles with fear. They are watching how you speak without checking their expression first. They are watching how your eyes have cleared, how your shoulders have risen, how your voice has found a new register, one no longer tuned to their moods. And for all their bravado, all their performance, this terrifies them. Because what they see is not just your strength. They see their irrelevance. They see that you do not look back, that you do not leave the door ajar, that your prayers no longer include their name. And to a narcissist, that kind of closure feels like death. C.S. Lewis once observed that hell begins with a grumbling mood and grows into something more permanent, more terrible. In this context, the narcissist's obsession is a kind of personal hell, a private torment that deepens the longer they sit in it, unresolved, unrepentant, unable to let go of the version of reality where they were still the sun around which you orbited. They are no longer the sun, and that, more than anything, is their agony. There is no healing for them in watching you thrive, because they do not desire your wholeness. They desire your dependence, and without it, they become nothing more than a stranger, peering through glass, watching a life that no longer needs their shadow to cast definition. They may say nothing. They may do nothing. But the obsession is there, etched into the choices they make, the people they try to mimic you with, the narratives they try to overwrite. Because the wound is not just that they lost you. It's that they lost access to the version of themselves that only existed in your reflection. And now that the reflection is gone, so is the illusion. This is the price of counterfeit connection. When the source of light is removed, what remains is not neutrality, it is absence. And into that absence they stare again and again, hoping to see something that will restore what has been broken. But they never will, because what they had was never real. What they lost was never theirs. And what they now witness, your healing, your rising, your peace, belongs not to their past, but to your future in God. The desperate blame game, rewriting the narrative after you're gone. When God removes someone from the stage of your life, He often allows them to speak one final line, not for truth, but for exposure. And so it is with the narcissist, who, once you are gone, does not seek truth, but reinvention. The story must be rewritten, not to bring healing, but to salvage their image. Not for the sake of clarity, but for the comfort of control. You see, truth is unbearable to those who have built their identity on performance. And in the narcissist world, your departure cannot be allowed to stand as a verdict. It must be spun into betrayal. It must be reframed as abandonment. The narrative must be reshaped, not to reflect what actually happened, but to ensure they remain the hero, the martyr, or the misunderstood. So they speak, perhaps quietly at first, then with increasing boldness. They say you changed. They say you became cold, distant, unpredictable. They say they gave their all and were met with ingratitude. And all of this, of course, is to protect the one thing they cherish above all else. Not you, but their reputation. To admit the truth. That you left not out of selfishness, but out of survival. Not from bitterness, but from revelation. Would be to confess their own failure, their mistreatment, their control, their manipulation. And that is a mirror they cannot bear to face. But make no mistake, the rewriting of your story is not about your actions. It is about their shame. The shame they cannot process becomes a weapon they wield in secret, and when that shame is too heavy to carry, they lay it upon your name, hoping that by staining your memory, they can bleach their conscience. This is the silent campaign they launch after separation, not for reconciliation, but for redemption in the eyes of those still watching. Friends, family, community, even God, if they still pretend to speak His name. The narcissist begins to build a new altar upon the ruins, this time not to worship control, but to protect the illusion that they were always the victim. C.S. Lewis once warned that the greatest sin is not merely in doing wrong, but in refusing to be wronged. The refusal to admit wrongdoing becomes its own kind of idolatry. It creates a shell that cannot be broken by reason, by kindness, or by confrontation. And so they retreat, not into healing, but into fiction. But what they cannot anticipate, what they never understand, is that truth has a voice of its own. It does not shout, it does not slander, but it remains unmoved, unchanged, and in time the contrast becomes too clear to ignore. Their story is filled with accusation. Yours is marked by peace. They must defend themselves loudly. You do not need to say a word, and this is what unsettles them most. Your silence speaks louder than their performance. Your refusal to retaliate, your quiet restoration, your unwavering dignity, all of it becomes a living testimony that contradicts their carefully scripted version of events. What they cannot destroy, they must distort. What they cannot discredit, they must recast. And yet, even as they do, the truth endures, because it was never in your defense that you were justified. It was in the witness of your life after them. This is the power of divine separation. It leaves no blood on your hands, no stain on your tongue. It places the weight of exposure solely on the one who sought to control the narrative. And try as they might, the narcissist will never be able to erase the truth of what God removed. Because your absence is not a question mark in their story. It is a period, the final one, signed not by your choice alone, but by the author of all things. Let them tell their tale. Let them dress it with poetry and polished words. The truth needs no armor. And your life, healed and held by God, is proof that no false story can withstand the weight of divine clarity. The final truth, God's separation, was their exposure. There is a sacred moment in every believer's journey when what once felt like rejection is finally recognized as protection. What once seemed like abandonment is revealed to be an act of divine mercy. And what once felt like the end of something precious is understood to be the beginning of something holy. When God separated you from the narcissist, it was not merely a change in circumstance. It was a line drawn by heaven, not in anger, not in haste, but in righteousness. It was a moment not of escape, but of revelation. Because the God who sees in secret does not always act in spectacle. He sometimes delivers by removal, and sometimes judges without a word. To them it looked like you left, but in truth you were extracted. You were not just released, you were retrieved. And the relationship that had cloaked itself in sentiment, in familiarity, in spiritual mimicry, was unmasked, not by your accusations, but by God's absence. For what the narcissist never understood, and perhaps still cannot admit, is that their greatest loss was not you, it was what your presence represented, the presence of God moving through you. The grace they trampled, the patience they exhausted, the love they exploited, it was never yours alone. It was heaven's mercy extended again and again. But when mercy is rejected long enough, God does not plead. He departs. And his departure is never neutral. It is never passive. It exposes. Suddenly, where light once covered, shadows now multiply. Where grace once softened harshness, bitterness grows unchecked. Where once your presence buffered consequence, now the full weight of who they are returns to them. And this they cannot bear. Because now they must face themselves without your light, without your silence to shield them, without your prayers to restrain the storm. C.S. Lewis once wrote that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And for the narcissist, the silence left behind after your departure is a deafening sermon. It speaks not with words, but with absence. It says, I will not strive with you forever. What terrifies them most is not your healing, it is their exposure. Not your new beginning, but the clarity of their ending. Not your victory, but the realization that heaven itself intervened. Because now the story is no longer theirs to tell. The performance is over, the lights are out, and they stand alone on the stage they once dominated, without audience, without applause, without script. And you have walked off that stage, not wounded, but wiser, not bitter, but beloved, not cast aside, but called out. Let them mock, let them minimize, let them rewrite the narrative if they must, but know this, heaven witnessed the truth, and when God separates, He does not apologize, He does not explain Himself, because the truth He reveals is self-evident to those who have eyes to see. This is the great reversal. The one who once had the upper hand now trembles in silence. The one who played the martyr is now haunted by the knowledge that God Himself stepped in and said, enough. And so you do not need to justify your absence. You do not need to defend your deliverance. You need only walk in it. Because God did not merely pull you out, He elevated you. Not above them in pride, but beyond them in peace. And that is the truth no narcissist dares to speak. That the very God they denied was the one who saved you from them, the justice of silence. There is a kind of justice that makes no sound. It does not arrive with thunder or vengeance. It comes softly, as a door closing, quietly as a light withdrawing from a room where it is no longer welcomed. And when that door closed between you and the narcissist, it was not your hand alone that turned the handle. It was the unseen hand of God, the same God who weeps over the oppressed and walks with the weary, the same God who rescues not with violence, but with separation. This is the final mercy and the final judgment. You were not just delivered, they were revealed. Let that truth settle in your bones. Let it comfort you when memory threatens to rewrite history, when their false narratives reach your ears. You do not owe a rebuttal. You do not need to re-enter the stage you were called off, because when heaven declares the end of a season, its word is final, and peace becomes your inheritance. C.S. Lewis once said, "To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. And so you may forgive. Yes, not because they deserve it, but because you were never meant to carry the weight of judgment. That belongs to God. Your role now is not to prove anything, but to walk in the dignity of your healing, to live in the clarity of your calling, and to rest in the assurance that the one who saw everything has already ruled in your favor." Let them watch. Let them rewrite. Let them wrestle. But you are free. You are covered. You are chosen. And nothing they say, nothing they hide, and nothing they fear can ever reverse the truth of what God has done. He took you away. He set you apart. And in doing so, He exposed everything they hoped you'd never see. So go forward, not in fear, but in faith, not in bitterness, but in strength. And remember, you were never theirs. You were always His.